I'd always been a man of discipline and focus. As an Olympic athlete, I was used to the rigorous schedules, the long months away from home, the sacrifices. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for 8 years when I first began making my mark in the world of track and field. She supported me through every early morning, every setback, every injury. I believed in her love, believed that no matter how far I went, how often I left, we'd always have each other. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle. A missed text here, a delayed reply there. But I brushed it off. She knew how hectic my life could get. Between the practices, the competitions, and the interviews, I didn't always have time to keep in touch. I told myself it was just her being busy with the kids, trying to juggle everything on her own. But then, the calls started to taper off. And when I did speak to her, there was an undercurrent in her voice, a forced cheerfulness that felt off. It all came to a head during the World Championships in London. I had just finished my final race of the season, an event I'd trained for tirelessly, and was waiting to hear the results. I was high on adrenaline, exhausted, and ready to catch up with my family. But as I sat in my hotel room, waiting for the text I'd grown accustomed to after every meet, it never came. Instead, my phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. I found someone else. Don't come home." I was stunned. My heart dropped into my stomach. The words blurred on the screen, as if my mind couldn't quite grasp the reality of them. I looked at the phone, then back at the empty hotel room around me. My life had just unraveled in the span of a text. But I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone or run to the door, trying to chase her down. No, I just sat there, numb. It was like a strange out-of-body experience, a calmness that felt unnatural. I was on the verge of the biggest moment of my career, yet here I was, a man torn apart by betrayal. It was a paradox, a world of excitement and achievement crashing into the painful reality of personal loss. The text came late in the evening, and I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, piecing together the fragments of my life. She had taken the kids, but she didn't say where. She didn't say if she'd found a new home or if she was leaving with someone else. No details, just a simple statement that I was no longer welcome. I wasn't sure how to move forward from here. The competition, the records, the medals, it all felt so trivial now. But beneath the surface, something was beginning to stir. There were pieces to this puzzle, and I needed to find out the truth. I had a plan, a quiet one. I started by checking Emily's social media, looking for any clues that might lead me to where she was. At first, there was nothing new, just the usual posts of the kids at soccer games, birthdays, and school recitals. But then, I noticed something. A comment on a post from an old friend of hers, a man. He had written, "Can't wait to see you both soon. We've got a lot to talk about." Who was this guy? I clicked on his profile, but it was locked. Still, I could feel the tide of suspicion rising within me. It wasn't a big step, but it was a start to unraveling what had been kept hidden from me. I couldn't let it go. I wouldn't let it go. I began to gather information. A call to the neighbor, a quick search through old messages, a peek into the kids' school records. I wasn't sure where this was going, but I knew I had to keep digging. No matter how much pain it brought me, I had to know the truth. Something wasn't right, and I was going to find out exactly what. I felt the weight of my investigation settling in. It was like a storm was brewing on the horizon, and I was the only one who could see it coming. The pieces were scattered, but each clue I uncovered brought me closer to understanding the mess my life had become. A divorce wasn't just a divorce, it was a betrayal. And that betrayal ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just about losing a wife. It was about discovering who she had become, who I had been blind to, and where my future was heading. But no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much I wanted to scream, I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change forever, and it would never be the same again. The days after that text felt like they blurred into one long, empty stretch. I threw myself into my training, hoping that if I pushed my body to the limits, I could forget for just a moment. The thought of Emily, of my kids, haunted me, but I kept it under wraps. I needed to stay focused, to keep up appearances. I couldn't afford to lose everything. Not now. Not when the world was watching. It wasn't until a week later, after I had returned from London, that things began to take shape. I walked into an empty house. No kids running around. No sound of Emily cooking in the kitchen. No laughter echoing through the halls. Just silence. The house felt hollow, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I checked the kids' rooms. Their toys were still scattered on the floor, their homework unfinished on the desk. It was as if they'd just been ripped from the space they'd once called home. The sadness in my chest grew heavier, and the anger began to creep in. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. We had built this life together. I had sacrificed so much for her, for the family. And now? Now I was alone. The first step in my investigation was simple: find out where she went. I contacted her family, but no one knew anything. Emily's parents were out of the loop, and my calls to her friends went unanswered. I wasn't sure why I expected them to tell me the truth. She had always been the one with the connections. But I wasn't going to sit back and let her disappear without a trace. The more I dug, the more I began to notice odd patterns in her behavior leading up to her departure. It wasn't just the phone calls that grew less frequent or the vague answers about what she was doing when I was away. There were other things, small things, like her sudden disinterest in the future. Whenever I would talk about our next vacation or the plans I had for the kids, she would get distant, distracted, like she wasn't truly there with me anymore. And then there was the matter of the phone. It was always on silent. I didn't think much of it at first, thinking she was just tired of being hounded by calls. But now, in hindsight, I realized that it was a sign of something bigger. She had been hiding something. Someone. The kids. They were the only connection I still had to Emily. They were innocent in all of this, caught in the crossfire of a war I never saw coming. I couldn't let them fall into whatever mess their mother had created. They were the only reason I still had a reason to fight. The next night, I went to their school. I spoke to their teachers, their friends, anyone who might have seen something, anything that could give me a lead. That's when I heard it. She's been seeing someone, Ethan. The words hit me like a slap. I turned to the teacher, my heart racing in my chest. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Who? I managed to get out. She hesitated, looking over her shoulder as if to make sure no one else was listening. I don't know, Ethan, but I saw her with him a few times. Someone who works with you, I think. I swallowed hard. A coworker? I had so many people I interacted with in the world of athletics. Coaches, fellow competitors, agents. But who? The world I had built with Emily, the life we shared, was beginning to crumble, and the worst part was that I was just now realizing how much I had been blind to. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the pieces were falling into place. Slowly, almost methodically, I started connecting the dots. There was something more to this, something I couldn't yet understand, but I knew deep down that Emily's departure wasn't just about her finding someone new. No, there was more at play here, and I wasn't going to rest until I figured it out. I contacted a few people from the athletic community. They didn't have much to say, but I managed to uncover one small detail. Emily had been spending more time with a colleague of mine, a man who'd always been friendly, but I never thought much of him. Now, I was beginning to see things in a different light. Was this the man? The one who had taken my family from me? The information I had gathered wasn't much yet, but it was enough to stir something in me. A desire for justice. A need to understand why Emily had done what she had. What had driven her to leave us behind? What was she trying to escape? And so, I began to watch. I watched my phone for clues, my email for messages, the windows of our old life, looking for something, anything, that could lead me to the truth. I wasn't sure what would happen when I found it, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not let her walk away without explaining herself. I wasn't going to sit by and let this story end like some unfinished race. No, this was just the beginning. The crash of my old life was just the first turn. The real fight had only just begun. The investigation, if you could even call it that, was becoming more consuming by the day. I found myself constantly on edge, checking my phone, scrolling through social media, even revisiting old photos in the hope of finding some clue I had missed before. Every corner of our life together seemed to hold a secret. Every place we had been, every conversation we had, now seemed tainted by the suspicion I couldn't shake. I contacted the few people who still kept in touch with Emily, hoping to get an answer from them. They all said the same thing. They hadn't heard from her much lately, and if they did, she was always vague. One of her old friends told me, with a laugh, that she seemed more free, lately, more relaxed in a way that made me nauseous to hear. I wasn't blind to what was happening, but it was still hard to face the reality of it. She was out there, living her life without me, and I had no control over it. For the first time in years, I wasn't in charge. My life had always been about control, about pushing myself further, reaching higher, and mastering the race. But this was different. I couldn't run fast enough to catch up to her. I couldn't jump high enough to leap over the wreckage of my marriage. But I refused to give in. If I couldn't control the situation, I would at least understand it. The turning point came a week later. I found a text in Emily's old phone, one that I hadn't thought to check before. It was a simple message, but it had the power to unravel everything. The message was from a number I didn't recognize, a man's voice in the form of text, and it read, "I miss you. Can't wait to see you again. Let's make this our secret." My stomach twisted. I knew exactly who this man was. It was a fellow competitor, someone I had never considered more than a colleague, someone I trusted. At first, I had dismissed the thought of him as a suspect, believing that Emily wouldn't do something like this with someone I worked with. But now, the evidence was staring me in the face. She had been with him. They had been seeing each other behind my back. And worse, they had kept it a secret. The anger surged through me like a tidal wave, crashing against every barrier I had tried to put up. But instead of lashing out, instead of letting that anger consume me, I focused it. I would find this man. I would confront him. He had taken my family, and I needed answers. I wasn't going to let this lie go unanswered. I spent the next few days tracking his every move. He wasn't hard to find. He was an athlete like me, always in the spotlight, always at events, always surrounded by the same people. It didn't take long to gather a few key pieces of information: his schedule, his upcoming competitions, his social media activity. I started to see the patterns, where he would be, when, and who he would be with. He was living the life I used to have with Emily. I also started reaching out to my contacts in the athletic world, making subtle inquiries. They didn't know much, but they did give me one crucial piece of information. He had been seen with Emily at several private events, always in the company of other high-profile figures. The more I learned, the clearer it became that this man was not just a casual acquaintance. He was a significant part of whatever Emily's new life had become. The walls were closing in. I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on me, suffocating me. But despite the emotional turmoil, there was something liberating about the search. With each step, I felt a sense of control returning. I wasn't going to let them hide behind secrets anymore. I was going to expose it all. I started planning my confrontation with him. It wasn't going to be violent. I wasn't that kind of man. But I was determined. I had to make him face the consequences of his actions. He needed to understand the pain he had caused, the family he had torn apart. I wasn't sure what I would say when I saw him, but I knew one thing. I would demand the truth and nothing less. But even as I prepared for this confrontation, another unsettling thought kept nagging at me. What if Emily wasn't the only one to blame? What if this man had been leading her into something darker, something more destructive than I could even imagine? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about infidelity. It was about betrayal on a much deeper level. It was about a life I thought I knew, a family I thought I had, being taken from me. The next step was clear. I had to confront them both. And when I did, I would make sure there was no turning back. I was done being the passive observer of my own life. It was time to reclaim it. The day finally arrived when I was going to confront him. I had spent the last few days preparing myself mentally, trying to steel myself against the flood of emotions I knew would come when I finally stood face to face with the man who had taken everything from me. I had tracked his every move. I knew where he would be that afternoon, at a small meet-and-greet event for athletes, something routine for him. He had no idea I was watching. I slipped into the venue unnoticed, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about confronting a man who had wronged me. This was about getting answers. This was about understanding why my wife, the woman I had given everything to, had chosen him over our family. I spotted him in the crowd, talking to a group of younger athletes, his arms around them in that familiar, friendly manner. He was larger than life, confident, laughing easily with everyone around him. But the moment he saw me, I could tell something shifted. He recognized me immediately, his eyes narrowing just a fraction before he gave a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I walked toward him, my legs moving of their own accord, carrying me into the heart of this confrontation. The closer I got, the more the world around me seemed to fade away. It was just him and me now, and whatever words I said next would change everything. "Ethan," he said, his tone still cordial, but with an edge of wariness. Didn't expect to see you here. I stopped in front of him, not bothering to return the pleasantries. I need to talk to you, I said, my voice cold. And I think you know exactly why. His smile faltered, and for a split second, he looked unsure of himself. But then, he straightened up, his confidence returning. Look, man, I don't know what you think. I know everything. I cut him off. I know about you and Emily. I know she's been seeing you behind my back. And I know you've been a part of destroying my family. The crowd around us seemed to shift uncomfortably, but I didn't care. All that mattered was getting the truth from him. His face hardened, and he stepped a little closer, lowering his voice. Listen, Ethan, I don't want any trouble. I never meant for it to go this far, but you never meant for it to go this far? I repeated, incredulous. You've been seeing my wife behind my back, and you think that's okay? He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated, but unwilling to back down. It just happened, all right? Emily and we had something. Something you weren't giving her. Don't act like you didn't know it was coming. She was unhappy, man. I didn't make her leave. That's on her, not me. The words hit me harder than I had expected. I had always prided myself on knowing my family, on knowing what Emily needed. But hearing it from him, hearing that she had felt neglected, that she had felt unloved, was a slap in the face. I had never seen it coming, not once. But then again, I had been so focused on my career, on the next race, the next competition, the next win, that I didn't see her slipping away from me. She never told me, I said, my voice quieter now, laced with anger. She never once said she wasn't happy. The man shrugged. She wasn't the kind of person who could tell you that. She was scared, Ethan. Scared of losing you, scared of being alone. She needed someone to listen to her. His words stung, and for a moment, I stood there, dumbfounded. Emily had been unhappy. She had felt so isolated that she couldn't even talk to me about it. I thought I knew her, thought I understood what she needed. But clearly, I had failed her. You took my family from me, I finally said, my voice steady but filled with a quiet fury. You took my wife. And for what? A few months of secrecy? A few moments of stolen time? The man looked away, uncomfortable, but didn't deny it. He didn't have to. I could see the guilt in his eyes. I never meant for it to go this far. I don't want to make things worse, Ethan, but I can't undo what's been done. She made her choice. I stood there, staring at him, trying to process everything he was saying. There was no anger left in me now, just an overwhelming sadness. I had been blindsided, and no amount of confrontation could change that. What he had done to my family couldn't be erased, no matter how many harsh words we exchanged. I don't care about your justifications, I said, finally turning away. You'll have to live with this. But don't think you've won. You've taken something from me that you can't ever get back. As I walked away, I could feel the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. Confronting him hadn't been about winning. It had been about taking back some control, some dignity, even if it was just for a moment. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. The pain wasn't over. The betrayal wasn't over. But it was the first step in reclaiming my life. And that was enough for now. I didn't expect much to change after confronting him. I knew deep down that there were no easy answers, no perfect resolution that would make everything right again. But still, there was something cathartic about finally confronting the man who had been a part of the destruction of my life. It was like lifting a weight from my chest, even if the burden of the truth still lingered. The next few days passed in a haze. I threw myself into my training more than ever, as if pushing my body to its limits would somehow numb the ache in my chest. I couldn't think about Emily without feeling like the world was slipping through my fingers. She was out there, living her life without me, and I was here, left to pick up the pieces of a family that no longer existed in the way I had known it. But I couldn't stop the thoughts. They crept in when I was alone at night, when I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. What if it hadn't been just him? What if there had been more to this than I had even realized? What if I had been too blind to see the warning signs? The more I thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The strange behavior, the distance in Emily's voice, the sudden disinterest in our future, it all made sense now. It wasn't just that she had fallen out of love with me. She had been led down a path by someone else, someone who had whispered the right words, someone who had promised her the things I couldn't give her anymore. I started going through old messages again, searching for anything that might give me more clarity. I had to understand why she had left, why she had chosen to walk away without any explanation. As I scrolled through her texts, there was one message that stood out. A message from the day before she left. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Everything is ready. She doesn't know, but she'll be happier this way. I promise. Just a little longer, and we'll be free. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She had been planning this. This wasn't some spontaneous decision. She had been plotting this escape for weeks, maybe even months. She had made up her mind, and there was nothing I could have done to stop it. I sat down, my mind racing. Was it him? Was he the one who had been telling her these things? Or was there someone else involved? The thought of Emily making plans behind my back, of her talking about me like I was some kind of burden she needed to be rid of, it made my stomach churn. I needed to know more. I needed answers. I started to piece together the timeline, trying to figure out when exactly she had started distancing herself. It was subtle at first, small changes in her behavior that I hadn't noticed because I had been too caught up in my own world. But looking back, I could see it now. Her reluctance to talk about the future, her sudden need for space, her detachment during our conversations. It had all been leading up to this moment. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how much of our life together had been a lie. Emily had been hiding things from me, hiding emotions I hadn't known about, keeping secrets that I never even suspected. She had been living in two worlds, the one she had with me and the one she was building with him. But even with all of this new information, something in me refused to let go. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that she had been willing to throw it all away without even trying to talk to me, without giving me the chance to understand what was really going on in her heart. And then it hit me. I had been trying to hold on to something that was already gone. I had been clinging to the past, to the idea of the family we once had, but that wasn't reality anymore. Emily had moved on, and no amount of confronting her or him was going to change that. But what could I do? I was left with a choice. I could continue to chase the ghosts of the past, trying to uncover every detail, every secret, until there was nothing left but a hollow shell of a man. Or I could let go. The decision wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I had ever had to face. But deep down, I knew I had to start moving forward. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of what was lost. I had to let go of the anger, the pain, and the confusion. I had to reclaim my life, my future, and my purpose. I began to realize that the only person I had control over now was myself. It was up to me to rebuild, to find new meaning in my life, and to find peace amidst the chaos. And so, I made a decision. I would stop searching for answers that weren't mine to find. I would stop holding on to the past. It was time to move on. Time to let go of what had been and focus on what could be. As I walked out of my house that day, a small but powerful weight lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving forward. The days following my decision were strange. It wasn't as if the pain suddenly disappeared or that everything became clear. I had moments where the weight of the past would crash down on me, and I would wonder if I had made the right choice. But there were also moments, small, fleeting moments, where I could see the potential for something new, something better. It wasn't easy. I had to face the reality of my new life, one that was completely different from what I had imagined. I had no wife to come home to, no family to fall back on. I was starting over, but I refused to let that scare me. I refused to let it keep me in the past, in the wreckage of my old life. I focused on the kids, on being the father they needed me to be. I started taking them to their soccer practices, helping with homework, and being present in ways I hadn't been before. They were my anchor, my reason to keep moving forward. I knew they were hurting too, and while I couldn't fix everything, I could at least be there for them. I could show them that life didn't end when things fell apart. Life went on, and we had to keep going with it. But I also took time for myself. I started to pick up old hobbies that I had neglected during my marriage: reading, cooking, traveling. I spent weekends at local parks, taking walks, clearing my mind. Slowly, I began to feel like a person again, not just an athlete or a husband. I realized that there was more to life than winning races and meeting expectations. There was joy to be found in the simplest of things, in the moments when I wasn't chasing something, when I was just living. And then, a few months later, something unexpected happened. I was at a local track event, just watching from the sidelines, when I ran into an old friend from my past. Sarah, a former teammate from when I was just starting out in the sport. We hadn't spoken in years, but when she saw me, she made her way over with that familiar smile. "Ethan, it's been forever," she said, her eyes lighting up. "You look good. How've you been?" For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected to see anyone from my old life, especially not in this context. But as we started talking, something clicked. There was no weight to our conversation, no past to drag us down. It was just two people reconnecting, sharing memories of a time before everything had gone wrong. It felt easy, light, and for the first time in a long time, I realized that I had been missing moments like this. We talked for hours. She told me about her life, her career, and how she had kept up with the sport in her own way. We laughed, reminisced, and shared stories of our old days together. There was no pressure, no expectations, just a genuine connection, free from the complications of the past. By the time we said goodbye, I felt something stir inside me, something that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was hope. Hope for the future, hope that I could rebuild, and that there were still good things ahead. In the weeks that followed, we saw each other more often. Not in the same way I had once hoped to rebuild my relationship with Emily, but in a way that felt healthy and right. It wasn't about rushing into something or trying to fill the empty space left behind. It was about rediscovery, about enjoying life in the present and not constantly searching for the past. I was learning that healing wasn't a linear process. Some days were better than others, but the key was to keep moving forward, no matter how small the steps might be. And with Sarah, I started to see that the future held possibilities I hadn't even dared to imagine before. I wasn't sure where this would lead. I wasn't sure if it was the beginning of something new or just a passing moment of connection. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living again. Not just surviving, but truly living. The pain wasn't gone, but it was starting to fade into the background. The betrayal was still there, lingering like a shadow, but I could see the light now. It wasn't just about moving on from the past. It was about learning to embrace the future, no matter how uncertain it might be. I had been broken, but now I was rebuilding, one step at a time, and that was enough. As the months passed, I started to truly embrace my new reality. There were still moments when the weight of the past would catch up with me. Those quiet evenings alone when the silence felt too heavy, or when I caught a glimpse of an old family photo. But they didn't consume me anymore. I wasn't drowning in my grief or anger. I was learning to live with it, to coexist with the scars of my past, while looking forward to the future. My relationship with Sarah grew, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't rushed or forced. We took our time, allowing the connection to develop naturally, without the pressure of what comes next. It was freeing. I realized I was finally able to let go of the past, not because I was over it, but because I understood that clinging to it wasn't going to change anything. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd avoided for so long. It wasn't a quick fix, but it helped. It helped me understand that I had spent so long identifying myself by what I had lost. My identity had been tied to being an Olympic athlete, a husband, a father, and those labels had come crashing down. I was learning to rebuild myself, not based on who I had been, but on who I was becoming. And one day, I looked in the mirror and realized I had come further than I ever thought possible. My family wasn't the same anymore, but I was no longer trapped in the past, waiting for something to come back. I had moved on, not just for the sake of my kids or the sake of anyone else, but for myself. I didn't need to chase the past anymore. The future was waiting for me. It was early morning when I woke up, the sun just beginning to filter through the curtains, casting a soft golden light across the room. I had learned to cherish these small moments, the quiet mornings before the world became too loud. I was no longer the man I had been when I first received that fateful text from Emily. I had changed, reshaped by the events that had torn my life apart. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the man who stared back at me. There was still a sadness in my eyes, a trace of the betrayal I had endured, but there was something else, too, a glimmer of strength. I had survived. More than that, I had rebuilt. It had taken time, more time than I ever thought it would, but I had found my way back to myself. The journey had been long and painful, but I wasn't the same man who had been lost in the rubble of his former life. I glanced over at the bed beside me, where Sarah was still asleep, her chest rising and falling gently with each breath. The connection we shared was quiet and real. I wasn't rushing into anything, but there was a comfort in knowing that I wasn't alone anymore. For so long, I had defined myself by the love I had lost, but now I was learning to define myself by the love I had for myself. I could see the future more clearly now, not as something to fear, but as something to embrace. My kids were doing well, thriving in their own way, and I was able to be the father they deserved. We were finding our rhythm again, and it felt good. I still missed Emily, but I no longer resented her. The anger had faded into something softer, something I could live with. I didn't need closure from her anymore. I had found my own peace. As I stood by the window, watching the first light of day spill over the city, I thought about everything I had been through. The betrayals, the heartache, the endless search for answers. All of it had shaped me into the man I was becoming. A man who was no longer defined by the past, but by the strength he had found within himself to move forward. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. I was ready to face whatever came next. I had learned that life wasn't just about surviving the storms. It was about learning how to dance in the rain. And so, with the new day ahead of me, I took a deep breath and stepped forward, one step at a time.